Hi everyone, producer Andrew here. I hope you're all managing to stay safe and well. We recorded this podcast over the weekend via Skype. There was a couple of audio glitches in the recording, using new software, everyone's cramming Netflix. It's a strange time to use technology. So bear with us as we work it out as we go forward, but I hope you'll enjoy the show.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Manchester Green New Deal podcast. I'm Adam Williams. Today, which is the 4th of April, marks the beginning of a new era for the Labour Party, as Keir Starmer takes the leadership reins after a leadership contest that looked old-fashioned in its presentation and which was very much lacking in depth. I think you both would agree, would you?
I would say the leadership election has been thoroughly boring. But also the fact that, it's been unimportant in the scale of things that everything else has been going on. So
exactly,
I kind of forgot it was happening. About a month ago, I forgot that it was still going on.
Yeah, well, believe it or not, it's all over now, and we've got Sir Keir Starmer. Obviously, Labour for a Green New Deal championed Rebecca Long-Bailey. Obviously, she had the clearest, greenest credentials. But now that the die has been cast, it's up to all of us, I would say, to make sure that the Green New Deal is is in the policies at the very least, because there's no going back on that. I just want to take a moment as well, just to give a bit of praise to old JC there. Personally, I'll be forever grateful to Jeremy Corbyn, mainly for one thing. What he did was he allowed the members to take control of the policies of the party and really push for what they believed was essential going forward, which is really why I believe that the Green New Deal, which was branded as the Green Industrial Revolution, became a pivotal part of Labour's policies, if not in the end, its narrative and framing, which may have been a mistake. But no, goodbye to JC. And as we enter this new chapter, we are joined today by Dr Lucy Burke, who fought tooth and nail to become an MP at the last election in the politically complex and multi-layered area of Bury South. Andrew, Alex and myself all canvassed for Lucy, along with hundreds of others, but sadly it wasn't meant to be. However, Lucy certainly won't be defined by the loss of Bury South, as she has a research background in literary studies and critical cultural theory. Lucy works for the Department of English, Faculty of Arts and Humanities at Manchester Met, and is an Associate Fellow of the Centre of Ethics in Medicine and Society at Monash University in Australia. If that wasn't enough, Lucy is also a member of Manchester's Institute of Arts, Health and Social Change and a member of the representative body of Learning Disability England. And finally, Lucy is on the national executive of the University and College Union representing disabled members nationally. Lucy, welcome to the show.
Hi, hello.
Not at all. How are you anyway?
I'm all right. But it's just a very strange time, isn't it? I think everybody feels very disturbed and disrupted by what's going on, and I think there's a kind of level of anxiety that underpins everything that I think a lot of people are feeling but can't quite express as well. So I know a lot of people can't sleep at night properly, and a lot of people are just endlessly checking their news feeds.
Yeah,
it's strange because there's nothing we have to compare it with, is there?
No. And do you know what as well? I've been having really vivid dreams. I don't know about anybody else, but I'm someone that usually sleeps like a log, can't remember a dream, has no problem sleeping, but I'm really having these really strong, weird dreams, and I don't know if that's because I've got some underlying anxiety. I have no idea, but I have noticed that my dreams have become really, really vivid. Has anybody else felt that or experienced that?
Totally, man. I had a really weird dream last night about, this is very, very telling, I guess, that I couldn't find Jeremy Corbyn. That it was so strange. I was in a, it sounds silly, but I was in a pub trying to meet him and I couldn't find him. And
right. He stood you up.
Were you out on a night out with Jez?
I don't know. Maybe.
He stood him up.
Boy.
Well, he can go back to his allotment now. He doesn't really need to be in the limelight. He can go to the back benches and carry on the good fight there. But yeah,
hysterical.
Like Lucy was saying, I know a lot of people that have really struggled to sleep and are waking up in the middle of the night quite a lot. Between 3-5 o'clock in the morning, and not knowing what to do with
I
themselves.
think everybody feels really powerless.
Yeah, that's what I think I'm finding myself quite anxious because you're not able to make any plans at all, and it doesn't help me personally to have an eye on the bigger picture, because it just gets you down. So it has to be one day at a time or 1 week at a time, and it's just very it's a different way of doing things, I guess.
So Lucy, in the old world, which was about 4 weeks ago, the idea was to get you on the show, and we were going to talk about your experience in becoming, trying to become an MP in Bury South. In this brave new world, I think obviously it's like things have changed so ridiculously. What we're going to talk about tonight is basically the leadership of the Labour Party, your thoughts on that, but also as well, you've been involved in a campaign regarding disability rights under this pandemic. So if we want to start on the leadership, Sir Keir Starmer is the new leader of the Labour Party.
Yes, he is. Well, to be honest, that's what I expected. It's the result I expected. I'm on the left, have always been on the left. Would always have described myself as a socialist before it became acceptable to do that again, and have been involved with the Labour Party since I was a teenager. And so I've seen the Labour Party through various, kind of phases. And I would say that fundamentally what I want to see is a really sort of strong, open, inclusive and effective Labour Party. And so what matters to me and what I'm glad about is that both Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner have sort of committed to, to honouring those radical traditions and to sort of continuing with this transformative kind of agenda and vision that we saw in the manifestos in 2017 and 2019. And I think we've got to, take that and take that in good faith, and I think get behind the party. And make sure that we continue. What I would say really struck me about the Labour Party, over the last few years, is that there's been a lot of imagination. There's been a lot of kind of creative responses to the challenges that we face, and the Green New Deal is part of that. And I think that has radically changed the ways that the party sort of thinks and operates and approaches problems. And I think as long as we can keep hold of that energy and that imagination and that engagement with these issues, then we'll be all right. I just don't think now is the time for people to start backstabbing and undermining each other, and I think it would be massively self-indulgent right now for people to be doing that.
Yeah. So would you say that you're not disappointed that it's Keir Starmer? Is that a fair assessment? Not that you may have chosen Keir. I'm not going to ask you who you voted for, but you're saying that Keir maybe is someone that you think could potentially be okay?
Yes, and I think that the party is more than its leadership as well. I think it's a collective entity. I think the kind of mass movement inside the party, that kind of social movement spirit that I think a lot of younger activists have brought, is what's really important as well. And I think what's really important too is that we're now facing a completely unimaginable situation economically and kind of politically because of the coronavirus. And I think that, the only way to respond to that is in a radical way. So I think there's a lot of different things that have come together that mean that no, I'm not disappointed. I think it would be wrong to be disappointed in this context. I think we've got to have an eye to the sort of longer term and what we want to achieve, and just carry on working towards that. Yeah.
Gents, what do you think about Keir Starmer? Because we've not actually really spoke about it between us.
So, I mean, I think we all appreciate that the losses that we suffered, like to install a straight-faced lawyer from London off the soft left to win back those constituencies, seems counterintuitive. But I think he can succeed, and Lucy's right. It would be indulgent to walk away from it now. And there is still stuff that the grassroots can do to put pressure on the leadership to keep its feet by the fire when it comes to things like the Green New Deal. There's more to politics than elections and Parliament. Things happen beyond Westminster, important, and there's still, I think there's a solid foundation on which to build. So I don't really feel terribly upset.
I'm not surprised with the outcome between Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner. I think we all knew this was going to happen about 2.5 months ago. It seemed relatively wrapped up already. Even though I voted for Rebecca Long-Bailey as well. I thought Lisa Nandy was a great candidate in some respects. I think she had a very good analysis of, maybe some of our Brexit troubles. If, like Alex says, we have to have a clean-cut West Wing-esque, prime ministerial candidate to get people back, I'm all for it. If we can still hold the leadership to account and have the kind of socialist and, radical left-wing policies that we need to develop with these greater challenges that are coming, I don't care what wrapping it's in, as long as it gets done. And to pick up on Lucy's point earlier, I don't think there's ever really a time for like backstabbing in a party, and something that has annoyed me slightly is maybe people's call to unity now, which I totally appreciate, and obviously we should be united, but we should have been united for the last 3 years as well. And that may seem
that's
flippant,
a hard pill to swallow. Yeah, I totally get your point. Yeah, I mean, go on, Lisa.
No, I was going to say we've also got to be, to some extent, I don't want to reproduce behaviour I thought was bad.
Yeah.
That kind of divisive behaviour. I don't want to do those things that I was calling other people out for. And I think particularly at the moment, you don't want to do it just to sort of wreck a project when actually we do need to some extent to build something stronger, to recognise that in the way that sort of British politics works means that you've got sort of three parties really, and in terms of the left, that means that a lot of diverse views are held within the Labour Party inevitably. Do you know what I mean? And so we've got to find a way of understanding how you build alliances within that, strategically, in order to sort of further, what we all want to see, which is kind of, economic redistribution and sort of social justice for people. Yeah. And we can't, you don't do that by telling people, that there's no place for them. You have to welcome in different positions, and we have to be able to build a consensus both within the party and outside of it in order to really sort of develop and build on the ideas we believe in. And I think it's a kind of project that involves winning the arguments.
Yeah. And
I think some of the tone of politics has been very exclusive in some ways, like you can't be in my club, and that's happened. Various people take that position, and we can't do that. That's not how to persuade people. I don't think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, from my position, I'm unlike Lucy. I only really joined the Labour Party when Jeremy Corbyn arrived, and I saw a chance of creating a new movement, a radical movement, and one that was going to finally accept environmental and climate policies. So for me, the only reason I am a Labour member, and I'll be upfront about this, is because I see them as the quickest way of a major party getting into power to put forward radical climate policies. So I'm not going to, on day one with Keir Starmer in, say that's the end for me. I have to see what those policies are first. First and foremost, it has to be the Green New Deal in some sort of radical form. And I still feel, I mean, he was in Jeremy Corbyn's cabinet, He has always spoken kindly towards Jeremy Corbyn. He's not someone that was on the outside sniping, as far as I can see. I haven't got anything against him personally. I just want to see now in the coming days and weeks what emphasis he's putting on the Green New Deal. And hopefully that's going to be something that's quite prominent, which will allow me to carry on to feel like, as a sort of a Green member within the Labour Party, that this is still a party for me. And I can't say I'm not hopeful of that. I mean, I haven't seen anything to suggest that the Green New Deal or the Green Industrial Revolution is going to be scrapped. It'd be really interesting to see if he gets in his shadow cabinet. But yeah, from my perspective, you know, it's all about those environment policies now. So, you know, I'm happy to give the guy a chance and to see what he comes up with. But I have to say, I mean, I don't know if you guys think this as well, but like the irony of a guy who is named after Keir Hardie, but who's also a Sir, is the craziest thing, you know, you could think of for a name for a leader of the Labour Party. That's just, obviously it's a random thought, but I just find that staggering. Also as well in the not so much the leadership race, but the deputy leadership race, I do think, and it has to be said, the fact that Dawn Butler came last, to me, is an absolute disgrace. Does anybody have any thoughts or reasons as to why Dawn Butler, who's one of the most experienced people in that race, finished below candidates people had never heard of? That to me was staggering. Was anybody else shocked with that? Dawn Butler coming last in the deputy leadership race?
I suppose what I'd say is that, you know, again, I expected Angela Rayner to win that race. And I think she'll be a really great deputy leader, to be honest. I think she's got the kind of sort of charisma to do that job well, in terms of her ability to talk to people. And it's good to have a northern woman who wasn't, you know, hasn't gone through sort of, you know, at the top of the Labour Party. And I'm pleased about that. I think that you know, it was an interesting race. In some ways, it was a more interesting kind of bunch of people. Do you know what I mean? That were kind of going for it. I think Rosina Allen-Khan probably really came through and has come through sort of over the last few weeks. She did a really good campaign, I think. I think she's been really
brilliant campaign, yeah.
Yeah, you know, in talking about coronavirus, I think she was, you know, she's been strong in all kinds of different ways. So then you think, well, there's a block of people voting for Richard Bergen. There are people who are then voting for Rosina Allen-Khan because of the situation we're in. I imagine that that's kind of partly a kind of conjunction of different forces that meant that the votes were distributed in a way that didn't fall to Dawn Butler. That's the only reason, unless you think there's something else going on there.
I just think it's, you know, objectively looking at it, it's not a good look to have a strong black woman with that much experience, who's actually a fantastic politician, to come last. It's objectively not a good look, and I would hope there's not an issue there. It does worry me that she came so low down.
Well, if you look at it as well, the fact that we had 2 women and a man running for the leadership, and the man won out of all, it's like there's
4 women.
Well, yeah,
originally
there's something to be looked into with that. With Dawn Butler, I personally don't know much about her. I've seen her on Sky News a few times, and she's clearly a very good speaker, and doesn't take
she's brilliant
crap.
She's brilliant.
I'd love to see the vote breakdown by region and see how that plays into it. You know, maybe northern voters are coming out more for Rayner, and it's a very big field as well at the end. You know, there was more people left in the deputy leadership position by the end than there was in the head of the party. So it could be all kinds of things, but I agree with it. It doesn't look great at.
Possibly a discussion for another day. Let's see the breakdown. I just thought it was important to bring that up because, believe it or not, the Tories have one of the most diverse cabinets in British political history, and we have not. And I think, you know, and that could be coincidence, it could be reasons, but yeah, I do think we need to have that discussion, definitely.
But if you think about Rosina Allen Khan, you know, there is a woman of colour who came second, you know what I mean, as well, in a competition, you know, in a selection where, you know, it seemed quite clear that Angela Rayner was going to win. It's really difficult. I think one of the things that characterises the way that left politics works is people often voting, you know, for particular people, or in, you know, in slates or whatever. And so that can be part of a mix as well, where people don't necessarily, you know, really look at a candidate's kind of talents outside of particular sorts of decisions about who you should vote for or who you shouldn't vote for.
Yeah, sure. Right, well, I'll tell you what, guys. Let's just have a quick one about what Labour needs to do now in the short term, and obviously building a movement to win an election. What's people's thought? We've got Keir Starmer now. The die has been cast. We've got Angela Rayner. What do Labour need to do now in order to win back voters and eventually become a government? Lucy, what's your thoughts? And as someone who's been in the party sort of, you know, apparatus of sorts, what, you know, as you try to be an MP, you've got a bit of an insight of how it works, you know, what you know, Bury South was a very complex area, but I'm sure you can take lessons from it and sort of amplify that on the whole.
You keep talking about Bury South as being very complicated. Bury South is the constituency with the second largest Jewish community outside London, and that was a huge issue in the election. And it was really painful that I would talk to Jewish people in Bury South who had grandparents who'd fought in the Spanish Civil War, who'd been in, you know, had always voted Labour, who felt that they couldn't. And, you know, people often don't want to, you know, confront that, but I think, you know, we've got to confront that and be, you know, really unequivocal about tackling anti-Semitism, and I think also about being a party that has really robust and transparent disciplinary processes that people can trust in. And I think that goes for everybody. You need to have a process that seems to work, that works in a quick, you know, not speedy as in the sense of you know, too quick, but where you understand the process, where the process happens in a timely fashion, and where people understand what's involved in the process and can have faith in it. And I think that's a really important thing that we need to address for everybody. Actually, it was hard. It was one of the hardest things about that campaign, really, because you know, it felt awful sometimes to be standing in front of people who, and you know, people I'd known for a long time as well and had worked alongside, who were saying these things and felt that they couldn't be part of the Labour Party. So that
absolutely right. That needs to be dealt with, and that needs to be there's some sort of structure in place, like you say, where it can't be too quick, but it is quick enough so it looks important at the time that it's actually, you know, brought up. Thorough investigations, and obviously these people need to be expelled as and when proven that. And
I don't think anybody on the left or anybody committed to equality should have a problem in unequivocally condemning anti-Semitism. Do you know what I mean? I think that it shouldn't be something that causes anybody any sort of discomfort, you know, remotely. And I think it's shocking that sometimes it seems to, you know. I think we can all come together and say that, you know, that you know, a commitment to a sort of universal, sort of generic equality amongst people, that you listen to minority groups and you are prepared to acknowledge when things haven't gone right, that you're not defensive about stuff. You know, I think all of those are principles of a kind of socialism that I want to embrace.
You
know, and that we should all embrace. You know, nobody is above, you know, reflecting on them, on their own, you know, ideas, assumptions, beliefs. You know, we should all be able to do that and critically on what people are telling us, and I think that's hugely important.
Yeah, totally agree. But what areas do you think that Labour needs to be involved in regards to winning voters back in that that northern wall or the red wall? Keir needs to really. I'm not sure if Keir is the right guy for the job for the red wall, but let's say he is. What does he need to do to win those voters back?
I think one of the real obstacles that we face, and that we've got to be really honest about, is that we've had 10 years of austerity and of these absolutely devastating cuts to public services, that they have been administered by Labour councils in the north. So Labour councils have been the kind of the people who've had to front up these absolutely, this kind of decimation of public services and all of these things. And so as a consequence of that, people often attach some of those things to Labour councils rather than the government, and understanding that this is coming from a Tory government waging a kind of ideological war on certain groups of people, and on the idea of a state that supports people and all of those kinds of things. And so I think that's something that we've got to think about, because what you have then is you have the emergence of these groupings that are based around areas. Like in Bury, you've got kind of Whitefield First, Ratcliffe First, and those people, and they're sort of grassroots people trying to protect their own areas in the face of these cuts. And we've got to talk to, and Labour really ought to be the party that kind of can talk to people in those positions. And I think we've got to do a lot of work on the ground in communities to rebuild trust and the idea that the Labour Party is there and will represent the interests of those groups. So I think there's kind of work we've got to do there, which is about being more than a body that knocks on people's doors and says, "Will you vote for us?"
And these groups, Lucy, what sort of groups are they? These Radcliffe First groups that you?
Well, they're sort of community groups nominally, that represent and are sort of have different groups of people involved in them. But what we saw in Bury South is that they were in the last local elections took a seat from Labour in an area that should be a Labour area, sort of historically, because they were representing people who felt that they'd been left behind, and weren't, and that their area wasn't being recognised and invested in. So I think there's a lot of work that Labour needs to do in actual communities, I think, to begin to sort of rebuild the trust and the sort of disenchantment, because disenchantment with politics serves the Tories.
Yeah.
The Tories want people to not trust politicians and to believe that they're just after their own, for their own interests. They want people to think that, all politicians are liars.
They're all as bad as each other.
Yeah, because in a sense that means that, why not go for the people who are most flagrantly upfront about lying and self-interest? Do you know what I mean? It's kind of.
Yeah.
Do you think this is partly to do with like political education to a certain extent? So, those Labour councils being the front of conservative austerity. Is that because people see their councils, not fighting back against it? Or like I said, they just see them as being all as bad as each other?
I think there's a mixture of things in different places. I think it's interesting that where you have Labour councils who really tried to work in a very radical way with the cuts and with people talk about Preston all the time, don't they? But Preston survived what was happening really. I think there are ways in which councils can sort of act within the constraints to sort of to produce kind of better outcomes for communities, and that's what we need to be thinking about doing as well, I think.
Yeah. Do we feel that an election without Brexit suits Labour?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So yeah. So in a way, the next election, Keir's actually got a bit of an advantage there over the last election, hasn't he? Quite a bit of an advantage as well.
But he will definitely be attacked on the fact that he was part of like the Remain group in the Labour Party. You know,
yeah.
No matter what happens, I think he'll be seen as Labour's that.
Yeah.
I mean, he'll be attacked. He'll be attacked in exactly the same way as all Labour leaders are attacked. You know, people seem to forget, the attacks that systematic attacks that happen to people who weren't particularly on the left of the Labour Party as well.
Ironically, I feel that him being a sir, to use sort of medieval imagery, is going to be a bit of a shield against Tories, because it's very, very, it's going to be difficult for them, I think, to attack a Labour leader in the traditional sense that they are attacked when he is a sir. I think that could possibly shield him somewhat against some of that attacks. Hopefully. What do you guys think about that? The fact that he's a sir, a knight of the realm.
I don't think that will make any difference. I think there was a headline in The Sun which was like millionaire Keir Starmer.
Yeah.
Right.
And
so he started already.
Yeah, of course it has. And it won't. The point about how that works is that it doesn't really matter, because it's not really to do with, it's that those attacks aren't sort of principled in the sense that they follow a kind of coherent or consistent line.
Yeah.
Mm.
They're attacks because somebody is the leader of the Labour Party, and right-wing people, with sort of huge vested interests don't want a Labour government. So I don't think it'll make a difference. I think it might, it'll be used against him.
Like St. George could appear as the, Labour, leader, and the Sun would turn to like an animal rights activism newspaper saying this guy kills dragons. Like, it doesn't matter. They will find some madness to talk about.
Guys, now I want to give Lucy a little bit of space now to tell us a bit and give us a bit of context about a campaign that she was a part of. Which is it? Am I right in saying this all began with the pandemic, Lucy, and how the NICE sort of the guidelines on people with disabilities relating to the coronavirus? Is that correct?
Well, I've been sort of campaigning for and with and alongside people with learning disabilities for a long time, and partly prompted because my son has autism and a learning disability. And before this pandemic, people with learning disabilities in this country, have faced massive inequalities in terms of life expectancy. So we're talking about between 23 and 29 years younger than their non-disabled peers, and a lot of the deaths that people are recording are avoidable ones. So partly people with learning disabilities die younger, massively younger in this country, because they don't receive the kind of health care they need. They don't receive screening that they need. Their lives are assumed to be less worthwhile than other people's lives. And people die of neglect and things like that. And so you also have a population that is often very poor too. And so, and all the issues to do with poverty, isolation come into the mix as well. And then, a profoundly prejudiced, discriminatory sort of set of attitudes towards people who are different. Okay. So there's all of that, right? But in principle, and according to, and in law, people are supposed to be treated equally. And then you get the coronavirus pandemic, and the National Institute for Clinical Excellence produced a sort of guidance and a set of criteria for who should be given critical care. So how you would make a decision about whether or not to put somebody on a ventilator in intensive care. And what they did is they took something called the clinical frailty scale, which is a scale that was designed to understand frailty in older people with dementia. So this clinical frailty scale will look at various things to look at, you know, and understand frailty, basically. It was designed for older people with dementia, really, but they decided to use it and to take away the age constraints so that they could use this scale to judge anybody who turned up in hospital, you know, potentially needing ventilation with coronavirus. And one of the things on it is that it looks at whether or not you can live independently. So it uses, can you live independently? Can you manage money? Do you need help in everyday life? So my son needs help managing money and needs help in everyday life, but he's really, you know, in every other respect, you know, he weightlifts and he does kettlebell swings and he's well, and that using that score would be something that could be used when it first came out to deny him critical care. So a perfectly healthy person who could survive intensive care, you know, potentially had no reason not to be in intensive care, would be denied intensive care because of the use of that scale.
Right. So
which is
And how did you first find out about this?
I read the guidance. Well, I spend a lot, I spend a lot of time with people who work with, you know, people with learning disabilities, people who work with people with learning disabilities, and so I suppose I was looking for that stuff. Everybody who read it, who knows somebody with a learning disability or autism or cerebral palsy, understood what that was about, and that it was about essentially about you know, it felt like eugenics. And
yeah, certainly, yeah. So what was the first thing that you guys did when you read that? How did you come together and say, A, this needs to change, and B, what did you actually do to change this? Because essentially what you've done is you've challenged it and had this changed, haven't you?
Yeah, so there's a barrister called Steve Broach, who does a lot of human rights works and kind of does a lot of work with people with learning disabilities. And I talked to him and to a solicitor about a legal challenge and judicial review in relationship to human rights and the Equality Act. And we sent a letter to NICE and their solicitors, and, you know, explaining, you know, our feeling about what they were proposing, and they changed it. We got it changed. And
what have they changed that to?
What have they changed it to? Well, they say it can't be used for younger people with autism and a learning disability and cerebral palsy, basically. But there's a broader issue there, which is that the decisions that are being made about critical care are really problematic. I mean, my problem with all of that is that often those decisions are made not on the basis of sort of clinical decision making, but on assumptions about quality of life and the value of some people's lives.
Yeah.
So anytime you have a blanket sort of idea that you'll exclude a group of people, you're not making it even on sort of good medical grounds. You're making it because you think that some people are more worth saving than others. And I think actually, even though we got that changed, those decisions are still being made, and there's a kind of strange sort of tacit idea that somehow it's okay for us to think that about older people as well. Yeah. Or somehow it's okay for us to think about underlying health conditions in a particular way that means that we accept that certain people shouldn't be saved, or that it's better for certain people to have treatment than others. And I think that in the midst of a pandemic, you know, we've got to keep hold of some basic principles about kind of, the equality of people, between people.
Definitely. I think, these are some of the things you mentioned there are the arguments being brought up by the likes of Toby Young at the moment about, sacrificing the elders in our, community for the sake of the economy. And that is it's just shameful, like an economy is not more important than the population that it serves. The whole point of it is for us to enrich our lives and better ourselves through our own work and communities together. And we can't do that by just throwing a set of them under the bus. And I can't believe that someone at the NICE decided just to remove that age barrier out of that thing in the first place. I think it kind of feels like with some other stuff that there's a real lack of detail and a lot of planning going on right now as people are, trying to find ways to pin down and work with this crisis we're having.
Well, I think the thing that bothered me was that it could be circulated in the first place. They were quick to change it.
Yeah. So I was going to ask what their response was, but did it come with an apology? Did it come with people saying, "Oh, we didn't mean it like that," or did it come with, did anybody get sacked over this? I mean, it was great that they changed it so quickly, but what was the actual response as to why they put it in?
They described it as an unintended consequence. GPs have been identifying people who they think should be DNR and sending letters out to people and identifying people en masse who they think should be DNR. Whole groups DNR of people. To us, Lucy. Do not resuscitate. So doctors have been, I think some clinical commissioners have asked doctors, or doctors have, somebody from a care who runs a series of care homes was saying that doctors had put sort of blanket or sort of had this idea there'd be sort of blanket DNR decisions for lots of old people, for instance, in care homes, as if they would never even get to hospital. It's really worrying when, whenever people make decisions not based on individual cases, but on assumptions about big groups of people.
And who's making those assumptions, Lucy? Is it who's putting the guidance together? Is it doctors, medical professionals, or is it bureaucrats?
I'm not sure. I think that people recognise that that ICUs are going to be overwhelmed. I think they recognise that really difficult decisions are going to have to be made. And the reality is actually because of the lack of preparation and because of the underfunding of the health service and because of the mess that we're in and because of the failure to understand and support and recognise the significance of social care, that's the reality that we're facing. Mm-hmm. And and that's an absolute tragedy. It's a tragedy, but we should but it also kind of politically, we should still in the face of that, still be arguing that no decision should be made on the basis of an assumption about a group, but should always be made on the basis of an assumption about an individual. Yeah,
and let's be honest as well, it's been a failure of the government in the first few weeks, if not the first month, and decisions that they made that have also created this amount of people to be infected. So it's also as a consequence of government policy and failing.
Well, I mean, for me, okay, so you've got the issue about people getting to ICUs or whatever, or being hospitalised. If you understood and recognised and valued social care, if you knew about social care and understood that a lot of social care involves intimate care and that people have to be in close proximity with each other, you would protect people who are carers.
Yeah.
You would provide them with protective equipment. You would make sure that people in residential care contexts were safe and were isolated really early on. I mean, people knew this, before self-distancing was implemented here. Seeing will be an absolute tragedy. They're already talking about 13 people in a residential care home in Scotland having died. It's
just atrocious.
It's we could have acted more quickly, and we could have acted in a way that recognised social care and the significance of it. to this pandemic. You know, we could have been sort of much more on top of that.
When we spoke about you coming on the show, Lucy, you did want to sort of connect this as well, didn't you, to sort of environmental justice and disability rights needs to be central to environmental justice. Do you want to just expand on that sort of line of thinking?
Well, I mean, partly, I think that the climate emergency, you know, I don't think this pandemic is disconnected from that either in lots of ways. It's kind of tied to particular sorts of aspects of kind of globalization, how it's worked, of the ways in which pandemics might be generated and might be just, you know, might spread. I think in terms of sort of thinking about disability, I think, you know, we have to address the climate challenge. We have to address it radically. My concerns are that disabled people are often the first victims of climate emergencies, right? So if you're in need of support, or if you have an additional need, it's often harder for you, for instance, to evacuate from somewhere, or to leave somewhere, or to be, you know, with disabled people, you know, are often the people who are left behind when you've got flooding in places or whatever. And it's massively important that we understand and think about the environmental challenges we face in a way that includes and doesn't, you know, it includes disabled people, doesn't kind of make them and further kind of entrench the discrimination against them. But also, I think, recognises, you know, some of the kinds of strengths of kind of that kind of living a life or being disabled kind of can confer as well. I think disabled people are really understand more than a lot of other people the fact that we are dependent on one another. Yeah. And understand sort of interdependency, and understand different ways of living, or what it means to kind of live differently. And I think that's a vital sort of part of the ways we might want to imagine a different sort of future as well.
With that in mind, and in terms of a Green New Deal, what sort of provisions for the disabled, or for those who care for the disabled, would you want to see?
You know, I think that we need a model that starts with ordinary people, rather than kind of, you know, sort of proceeds from on high. So, you know, one of the really interesting things is thinking about plastic straws, because if you're somebody with cerebral palsy, you need a straw to drink. And everybody celebrated that, you know, oh, we're getting rid of straws. But actually that excluded a lot of people and was quite sort of, and was very difficult for people. And I just think that when we think about the changes that we need to make, they need to happen in dialogue with disabled people, and in a way that recognises, you know, that actually accommodating people's needs, recognising and working with people's needs and people who have additional needs, will produce a culture and a society that is good for everybody. That's what I've always believed, a society that starts with people who are most vulnerable today because of the ways that you know, sort of capitalism has worked, will be the most inclusive and supportive sort of society. So I think we need to involve and speak to people, and you know, and sort of think creatively about sort of new technologies in relationship to that as well.
Just a quick question for you, Lucy. So I'm assuming you've seen, like, you know, the massive stimulus packages put forward by the government in the last couple of weeks to support people's wages, 80% in most cases, and, you know, the self-employed more recently. Do you feel a kind of bittersweet irony in what's happening now than what you were advocating for, you know, three months ago?
Yeah.
Like,
everybody's a socialist in a crisis, right?
Yeah. Like, how do you think that plays out in the kind of like public consciousness between offering to people when everything seemed fine and people demanding it now? Is it a scarcity problem?
But partly, you know, what I would say is we're talking about people offering things to people now. I think we would have been a lot better served by universal basic income now.
Yeah,
actually, I you know, I think people are sort of applauding some of the things that have happened, but there are lots of people who are falling through the cracks of that. It's really cumbersome. Universal credit is kind of buckling under the strain of the number of people applying for it. It's not, you know, I think there were better ways in which we could have addressed the economic sort of implications of this crisis and the kind of suffering that people are experiencing because of sort of job losses and things like that. Bittersweet. I think that this depends on how we talk about what's happening, and how the Labour Party responds to what's happening now in a way that really kind of frames and leads the narrative around it. I don't think we can be. I don't think there'll be any business as usual for a long time because of what's happening. And I think the really important thing, if there's anything good can come out of this what is a desperate situation, it's that people will understand that, you know, we are all connected to one another, and that you know, unforeseen events produce these difficult situations, and we have to support each other, and supporting each other is central to everybody being safe and secure. And I think we have to start talking about that and understanding that very simple set of kind of ideas are integral to socialism. They're what it's about.
You've got to be social to be a socialist.
Yes, you've got to be social, and you've got to understand that everything is connected in a kind of social totality, and you know, and we have obligations to each other.
What do Labour and progressives more broadly need to do to differentiate themselves from a right wing which constantly reinvents itself and absorbs this kind of language of solidarity, basically?
The proper and appropriate response to this would be universal basic income for people, would be a kind of, not this kind of odd sort of rather sort of complicated set of processes that people are being asked to go through, but a kind of a response that says we will make sure that none of you fall through the cracks, that we are there for all of you. And I think we have to, as people on the left, have to kind of make a powerful case for something that a kind of message and an understanding of this crisis that understands who matters, who we need, who what's important, and just takes that forward. You know, in terms of the Green New Deal and that kind of thing, you know, climate change is something that we can only tackle if we radically re-envision you know, the economy, and we radically re-envision what matters to us all as well, you know. And I think it's interesting that sort of not being able to consume is quite an interesting feature of this epidemic. You know, we've got to a point quite rapidly where shopping becomes an end in itself, where consuming becomes an end in itself, where you don't have things because you need them, it's because you sort of want them momentarily, and all of that has got to change.
Yeah, totally.
And you know, and I think that's one of the things we might learn about now.
Yeah. So Lucy, I think one of the really fascinating points you brought up is how sort of disabled people or people with disabilities have relied on have highlighted how interconnected we should be, because they live a life where they're having to rely on people. And I really think it has been a bit of a blind spot there. I've been discussing climate justice and an environment for many, many years. And it is certainly a perspective that I've never heard of before. So I think that's really refreshing. And I think it's so true to look at the most vulnerable in our society, and ask, how can we learn? What experiences have you had that we can learn from to be better as a movement?
But I would change that, right? Because one of the things that I think I dislike about some of the ways that the Labour Party sort of discourse works is that people will talk about the vulnerable and say, we're here to help the vulnerable. And I think we should either say we're all vulnerable, or we should recognise people are made vulnerable for systemic reasons. So people aren't and we should be standing together.
Yeah,
do you know
totally
what I mean?
Agree.
Rather than a kind of charity model of good people help poor vulnerable. I don't like that. I think that's not
totally agree.
How it should work.
Because you're right, we're all vulnerable. We're all vulnerable, especially in the face of climate change. We are all vulnerable.
And this is the point. So humans are sort of intrinsically vulnerable and intrinsically need other people, and intrinsically, it's just that able-bodied people can kind of often imagine themselves as not that, but if people who are disabled kind of understand and accept interconnectedness, accept the kind of reality of people's bodies or minds or lives and things like that. And I think there's a lot to be gained from recognising and understanding that, and sort of thinking from that position in terms
totally
of
agree.
What we owe each other.
No, it's been totally fascinating. It's, like I say, it's certainly an area that I haven't thought about before, and hopefully it's an area that we can enhance and learn as a movement. 100%. I've really enjoyed the conversation, Lucy.
Totally.
Your opinion, do you think this crisis warrants another election?
Ooh,
I'm not ready yet. I only canvassed for you 4 times, Lucy. I don't know whether you're ready yet.
I mean, on a very sort of mundane and practical level, we can't have another election, can we? We can't leave out. I mean, and that's one of the things that worries me, actually, that, to some extent, we're in such a sort of odd place where we can't leave our house, where there's we haven't really talked about the coronavirus bill, but that's a nightmare for disabled people and amongst other things, and gives kind of fairly sort of draconian powers to the police and things like that. So I think we have to come through this crisis, but I think I would worry about, I think it could go one of 2 directions. It could go into, we could be facing something very sort of reactionary right wing, or we could be facing something very liberatory and very positive and progressive. And we have to fight, obviously, for the latter. But I can't. The idea of a general election now is like,
we've got election fatigue.
Big time.
What are some of the things in the coronavirus bill that are particularly negative towards the disabled community?
It removes the kind of obligations, the legal obligations towards things like special educational need provision. It attacked some very sort of significant aspects of the Care Act of 2014 in terms of what people were eligible for and what they could expect. It talks about, instead of talking about kind of obligation towards sort of reasonable adjustments, it talks about reasonable endeavours. So it's been very worrying for disabled people, basically.
And because there's been no time for consultation, it's just kind of being thrown through, Parliament right now. Because who would stand to vote against a bill called the Coronavirus Act or whatever right now.
Yeah, well, I think it's like all legislation. If you create it very quickly, and if you don't consult, and if you don't think through the implications, or if you have thought through the implications but people don't have the chance to challenge them, there's problems.
Yeah. So guys, has anyone got any shout outs for this podcast?
I want to shout out to Village Greens in Preswitch, who are really supporting the local community. It's a cooperative, and they are sort of doing food packages and things like that for people who can't get out.
Brilliant.
To them, a lot of activists, a lot of people involved in things like Kindberry, in the voluntary groups around here that are really working hard to make sure that people aren't disadvantaged. So I want to say a big thanks to them.
So I want to give a shout out to a local campaign that we have been involved with in the past, and that's Trees Not Cars. Obviously the coronavirus has sort of taken over everything, but I really want to give a shout out to Gemma, Julia and Claire, who are really the driving force behind Trees Not Cars. And if people don't know what this campaign is, it's a campaign that's based in Ancoats, and what it is, the Manchester Council is trying to build a massive car park in the area that's known to most people as having the Toys R Us venue, and I think it had Mothercare and stuff like that. And when that was sold, there was a real opportunity there for local residents to have a say about what they wanted that to be. Now, the Trees Not Cars group, they got over 12,000 signatures and put together a really important case to the council as to why it should be green spaces, or something that was more green and more environmentally friendly for all the things that was going on, like the climate change policies that Manchester Council were trying to say they were following. I was there at the council when it got rejected, along with some other Green New Deal members. But the ladies, they took it one step further and said, no, we're not having this. And they're actually taking Manchester City Council to court, and are raising money right now to try and get that decision overturned. Fantastic group. We'll put links to people to follow in regards to raising those funds and part of the campaign. But for me, shout out this week is for Trees Not Cars. Okay, guys, if anybody enjoyed this episode, please share it, via Twitter or Facebook, subscribe on YouTube. If you'd like to get involved in any way, you can contact us on our email, which is mcrgndpod.podcast@gmail.com. As ever, anyone that's playing their part and standing up for the environment, we love you, we appreciate you, and we hope everyone stays safe and well. Obviously, Lucy, massive thank you. I love to be taken to places that I've never had no knowledge about, and learn more and grow more. So really appreciate Lucy. And also as well, I hope you'll come back on the show, because you've got a lot more to say and a lot more to give. And I know that you're a real supporter of the Green New Deal, and having that knowledge and that guidance would be amazing in the future. So if and hopefully we can have it in our studios in Levinsune, where we can offer you a comfy seat and a cup of tea rather than through
brilliant.
Skype. Pandemic pending.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, guys. Signing out.
Bye.
See you, everyone. Cheers.
Bye.